I've just been informed, for those who need your coffee, that Kathy has some regular and decaf coffee out in the lounge if you need to replenish the caffeine or non-caffeine. We'll give folks a few more minutes to gather. People are still using the facilities. So Well, welcome again to those of you who've been here in time to enjoy a fellowship lunch. Hope people enjoyed that time to get to meet new folks or other friends. And we also want to extend a welcome to some folks who may be tuning in live on YouTube. Or for people down through the ages, we'll check Plainfield Friends website and look up exciting things to listen to. We had hoped that some of our friends from the Spanish-speaking Friends Church in Indianapolis would have been able to come and give us a little flavor of their meeting for worship. They were unable to join us today, but I'm delighted that friend Tom Roberts is here to share his musical talent with their introit and will be helping us with some music to lead into a time of worship, time of waiting worship before we hear from our speakers. First, Tom is going to play from Brother James' Air, which I think most of us know is based on the 23rd Psalm. And after he does that, we are going to be sharing some lyrics and a little music from another hymn from the FWCC Friends Hymnal that I hope many of you are familiar with, or maybe this is new. We'll learn that. So, Tom. Those of us familiar with Worship and Song, the hymnal produced by Friends General Conference, may note that it's divided up in different sections, and one of my favorite sections is called Encountering God, Gathering in Quiet. As a lead into our time of quiet waiting worship of 10 or 15 minutes we'll take, one of my favorite hymns that to prepare me and lead into quiet worship is called Teach Me to Stop and Listen, written by a non-friend, but we suspect that he may have had some experience with friends in unprogrammed worship, Ken Medema. I'm going to speak 2 lines, make sure they're heard, and then Tom will play. I know some folks are still reluctant to sing in a group, so we'll not be singing together, but you can maybe hum along internally as we go. Teach me to stop and listen. Teach me to center down. Teach me the use of silence. Teach me where peace is found. Teach me to hear your calling. Teach me to search your word. Teach me to hear in silence things I have never heard. Teach me to be collected. Teach me to be in tune. Teach me to be directed. Silence will end so soon. Then, when it's time for moving, grant that I may bring to every day and moment peace from a silent spring. Let us enter into a time of waiting worship.
sit here in this sacred space, surrounded by the beautiful grounds and the lovely weather today, I think about the generations of families who have used this place as a focal point of their dedication to their service to their Lord and Savior and to their fellow man. Now I have to admit that I'm doing something during silent worship that I would never have dreamed, and I'm sure none of my ancestors would have either. I'm texting. Because 60 miles to the north, there's a group getting ready for our annual missions auction that will benefit Quaker Haven. And they're asking me questions about things I didn't get moved before I left a week ago. And from the west to the same direction, I'm hearing from cousins who plan to come to be there to support Quaker Haven, the beneficiary of our auction, and to see relatives and friends. I'm glad that many of you have come back here today, and I've already met some people that I've never met before, so welcome to Western Carolina.
may we be thankful for times such as this when we meet together as friends, stop and listen and wait for the movings of the Spirit among us, especially when a message is given to share for the benefit of all. Amen. Well, I'm delighted that Sean McConaughey, the still relatively new General Superintendent of Western Yearly Meeting, able to spend time with us, not only to talk about his experience of Western Yearly Meeting and to talk about it, but because we're trying to get to know each other a little better, to share a little personally about his journey among friends that has led him to this place, including his time in Kenya. And after Sean speaks for a bit, we have time for questions. You may have a question to ask about his journey or about friends in Africa or about particular things about Western Yearly Meeting. So I'll invite Sean to come forward at this point.
Thanks, David. David got right on the ball. I'd been in the office all of 2 days, I think, when I received a call for this opportunity. And so nobody knew me very well at that point, and so please don't blame David if things go south here. And also, it is great to be together, isn't it, Peggy? I appreciated your sharing, and what a neat opportunity to be able to gather today. I heard how many of you met a new person you've never met before today? Yeah, see, isn't that great? Now, some of you might be raising your hand simply because you didn't remember meeting them before, but that's okay. That happens too. That happens too. It's been a while. I heard somebody today say, aside from, oh, it's good to see you again, I heard somebody say, I think it's been at least a decade since I saw you. And it may have just been through COVID, and it seemed like a decade, right? Somebody said, I think our mothers were friends back some time ago. So, there's some great greeting that's happening, and there's something about that with friends that is really special. My name is Sean McConaughey, and I've been serving as the Western Yearly Meeting General Superintendent for nearly 6 months now. It's really something. Katrina and I've been married. Katrina and I've been married 33 years. And she continues to be my best friend no matter what she says. And she challenges me in such great ways and helps me grow and become the person God is calling me to be. And I'm just always grateful for her. Robin suggested that maybe I tell our engagement story for sharing today. Not Robin. No, yeah, I have not. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. I'll be seeing you all later. Right, Robin and I are not engaged, just so you know. Katrina and I were at once engaged, now we're married. Robin suggested I tell the story about Katrina and I becoming engaged. How's that? And so I'm not going to. Anyway, it's a really great story, but that's another time. Anyway, we do have 2 grown children, and Jared and his wife Lissa live in Newberg, Oregon, and our daughter Elsie and her husband Peyton live in Bothell, Washington, and they just celebrated their first year of marriage. And between our kids, we have 3 grand cats and 1 grand almost dog. Katrina and I served as pastors for about 20 years in 2 different meetings in Northwest Yearly Meeting, which is affiliated with Evangelical Friends. And that yearly meeting was our home our whole lives until a few short years ago when there was a disastrous fracture. Some of you are familiar with disastrous fractures, yes? I was an associate superintendent there for the 10 years leading up to that time, and our whole family, really on both sides of our family and much of our extended family, found ourselves on the outside of the yearly meeting. This continues really to be one of the great disappointments in our lives. That is a group of people who nurtured us, raised us, showed us the path to ministry, supported us. And we just continue to be, at times, angry. We wrestle with anger. I think we wrestle with disbelief. And And mostly we wrestle with deep, deep sadness about that. And I know that some of you know those feelings. And I hope that we can find ways to move back towards one another, all of us, rather than farther apart from one another. Well, Katrina and I had been having discussions with FUM about serving as field staff in Kenya. And we were entering an empty nest stage, and we wondered what else, we might want to do. What could our lives look like as our kids headed off into their lives away from us? And we were well underway with this process with FUM when the yearly meeting there finalized this split. And we can talk more about that. But we spent then the next 4 years in Kenya and got to work with FUM and in the Africa Ministries office in Kisumu, Kenya. Many of you, or a number of you, might know John Mahanji, who was a director there, and we got to spend time working with John and many, many other people. And in a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the Kenyan friends that we came to really love and respect deeply. There were a lot, but some in particular I'd like to tell you about. We're also really grateful for this opportunity to have cross-cultural ministry because it helped us. It helped prepare us to move and serve among the often mysterious and enigmatic Hoosier people of Indiana. We're still trying to learn the language, traditions, customs, culture. We can now identify tenderloin and sugar cream pie from some distance, actually. So we're getting there. We have 33 meetings here in Western Yearly Meeting. And I think somewhere around roughly, Tom could probably tell us more, he's been our statistician, but around 12 to 1,500 members, something like that, I don't know. And he's over there going like this, anyway. He has no idea but much less, as is the case with most of us, with regular attenders, on a Sunday morning. And we're happy to be here, quite happy. I'm taken with the theme that FWCC has put forward for a number of events, but specifically coming up next Sunday, the World Quaker Day, on becoming the Quakers the world needs. Becoming the Quakers the world needs. I'm really taken by that theme. And you can ask Robin later, but she kind of told me the story about how that theme came to life. And I think it's a theme that will lend itself to some great conversation and I hope action if meetings and churches begin to unpack what that could mean and relate it to the communities where our meetings are located. Of course, we often assume that's what we're doing, but I suspect that sometimes we forget or we stop doing that. And we suspect that what we're doing is just exactly what our community needs. And I think it's good for us to revisit that from time to time. Because we know how challenging these lockdown days have been, coupled with a steady move away from the church by so many people in America. It's not just the Friends Church that finds themselves, the Quakers finding themselves losing track of folks, but it's everywhere. And there's a number of reasons, obviously. There's, church abuse scandals. There's the rise of this kind of populist militant right wing among evangelical Protestants. There's this political extremism in our country that makes finding middle ground a sellout. And the general malaise towards all institutions in our country. I heard a Quaker leader say this week that there was some thinking that, of course, the church is declining and we had about a decade before there was a precipitous drop. And that was before the pandemic. And that the pandemic in some ways maybe has sped that up. So that we need to be serious about what does it mean to be the people, Quakers, that our world needs. So I hope we can see this theme as a challenge, as an opportunity. That maybe we can embody our understanding of God as one who invites transformation and grace and love. We believe that we can hear and know God's voice, and that even small communities of faith can bring powerful change and peace and hope. These, friends, are the Quakers the world needs. Now, I like to read authors who are writing about the church, the current state of the church. And here's a quote from one. "It's hard to exaggerate the degree to which the modern church seems irrelevant to modern man." I'll read that sentence again. "It's hard to exaggerate the degree to which the modern church seems irrelevant to modern man. The church is looked on as something to be neither seriously fought nor seriously defended." Ouch. Yeah? Well, this author actually wrote this in 1961. This is D. Elton Trueblood. And his book, The Company of the Committed, is a great reread. Alongside your current authors that you might read about the state of the church and the world today, pick that volume back up again, because I think it's a challenge to us today. And I want to be thinking about and challenging those of us in Western and in other places to think about how we might live fully into the call of God's Spirit to become the Quakers the world needs. Here in parts of Indiana where we live each day. And how it's lived out is going to look different in your community than it is in Plainfield or Rushville or other places. So what does it mean to be the children of light in 2022 and beyond? What does that look like? Can you envision that? Somebody was telling me this morning, I think we have become comfortable in our meeting, and we think we can just go on the way that we have been. And I want to talk about that, he said, because I don't think that's right. I think we're headed in a different direction. And I think that's true. So there are a couple things I've been thinking about. One of those is I think it means we need to open our eyes to what God is doing and join God's work, God's mission, God on the move. What do we see God doing around us? What nudges and opportunities come to us? And what new cultural shifts are happening in our neighborhood, in our state, in our county? Because those shifts often tend to threaten us and can make us want to withdraw into the familiar of our tradition and history. Weren't we great back then? You know? We did those things, and it is a great history. And are we paying attention to what the Spirit is doing beyond our church walls? Will we be bold enough to step out and join God in new ways? Now, a person in Kenya, I told you I'd tell you about a couple of people. A person in Kenya who embodies this for me is a woman named Getri Agiza. Some of you know Getri, have met her. Katrina and I refer to her as a force of nature. And if you've met her, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She is one of the bravest and most servant-minded people we know, and so kind. She has been overseeing the Friends Church Peace Team since the election violence in 2007 there in Kenya. And as Katrina and I departed, she took on some of our responsibilities there in Kenya, which was great. But Getri's the type of person who will sit on a matatu van and happen to overhear the person sitting next to her whisper into his phone about the need to kill someone. And she's the type of person that will go, I think I need to follow this person. And sure enough, the matatu stops, he gets off, she gets off. The next matatu pulls up, he gets in, she gets in. And wherever he went, she went. And it turns out that she followed him to kind of an empty lot, and there were other men there, and they were all sugarcane growers. And their plan was to storm the sugarcane processing plant office and kill some of the leaders, or they're the managers or whatever there, because they weren't getting what they needed. And Getry says, "Excuse me," and steps into the circle and begins to use the wall of whatever it is with a rock and scratches on the wall these diagrams that are conversations about reconciliation and are about she's a alternatives to violence leader. And so she maps out this whole plan for them. And they said, this is a good idea. And sure enough, they negotiated this meeting between the leadership of the mill and these farmers, and they all got what they wanted, and no one had to die. This is a kind of thing that Getry listens to. And there are other stories that are even more amazing in my estimation. But she listens to what the Spirit is doing, and she decides to join in that. And what we do may not be quite that drastic, but it's not any less important. I think a second thing we might think about doing is loving outrageously. Quakers often come off as, reserved and a bit ethereal at times and cerebral, maybe overly so. No one's accused me of being cerebral, but I'm hopeful that one day I'll be included among your ranks. So doing anything outrageously might make us a bit queasy. And it's also difficult to form a committee around this idea of loving outrageously, right? The Committee for the Concern of Loving with Abandon. Something like that. We don't know how to do that. But we have these two commandments that Jesus gives about loving God with everything that we are and loving our neighbors as ourselves. In the final paragraph of this book that Trueblood wrote, The Company of the Committed, he says, somewhere in the world there should be a society consciously and deliberately devoted to the task of seeing how love can be made real and demonstrating love in practice. Unfortunately, there is really only one candidate for the task. If God, as we believe, is truly revealed in the life of Christ, the most important thing to him is the creation of centers or meetings of loving fellowship, which in turn infect the world. Whether the world can be redeemed in this way, we do not know, but it is at least clear that there is no other way. Well said. This idea of becoming a society consciously and deliberately devoted to the task of seeing how love can be made real and demonstrating it in practice. A person in Kenya that we know that demonstrates this kind of love is a man named John Moru. Some of you have met John. And he lives clear up in the northwest corner of Kenya in the Turkana region. It's desert. He's among pastoralist people. And they're, herding sheep and goats and camels and donkeys and other things. There's a lot of herding that goes on. And John has been the director of the mission there. And he recently just retired from that and said, I have a different calling. And I want the Turkana mission to be a sending body for me and my wife as we go to South Sudan. And as we reach the Toposa people who have a language very similar to Turkana. And sure enough, John and Grace go every once in a while for a few months at a time or a few weeks at a time and go and help create a written language, a written Toposa language, so that the Toposa will have scripture in an alphabet and those kinds of things in their language. And this is not an easy place to go. I mean, we say South Sudan And I heard several of you go, ooh, Turkana's tough enough. But South Sudan raises the bar quite a bit. But it doesn't matter where John goes and where Grace go. They have this immense ability to love people and to love people into relationship and to care for them and to be interested in them. And they learn about them. I still get, and there may be some of you who also, I get texts from John almost weekly still. And just how are you? And we have good conversation. A third way we might, and don't worry, I don't have any more than this one, okay? This is the last one. A third way we might think about becoming the Quakers the world needs is that we begin to worry more about our center than our boundaries. True blood again. The church is never true to itself when it is living for itself. For if it is chiefly concerned with saving its own life, it will lose it. The nature of the church is such that it must always be engaged in finding new ways by which to transcend itself. Its main responsibility is always outside its own walls in the redemption of common life. What a great calling. What a great way to describe that. And maybe your meeting does that flawlessly. I know a few who do not. None of them are in Western Yearly Meeting, but does your meeting matter to the community around it? What are you known for in your community? Do they know you're there? And I think this also means being more expansive with how we define church, less concerned about who is in and who is out. We think of maybe the evangelical strain being a little more worried about the in and out people, that do certain things to be in and out. But I want to suggest to you that some of us who are on the more progressive end of things are no less guilty. We have our own in and out kinds of things. Because many of us think of our meeting as being open to anyone. But I don't know how many stories I've heard about those unspoken and invisible lines that separate the real Quakers from those who are trying to get to know us. Folks can sense this hierarchy, and they're not going to stick around for it. Now, a person in Kenya who exhibits this concern for the center more than the boundary is Dr. Robert Wafula. He is the principal of the Friends Theological College in Kaimosi, where Katrina and I were engaged. A little teaser there, yes? Anyway, he has this concern. There are now 22 yearly meetings in Kenya. And several of those have resulted from splits. They're usually not splits around theology, they're usually splits around power. And there are yearly meetings that have taken other yearly meetings to court. There's all of, that kind of thing happening in some places. And Robert says, I don't care what yearly meeting you're from. I don't care what where you're coming from. You are welcome at FTC, and FTC is the place where those things don't matter. And he's created this community at the college that allows students to come and study and be there with people from other yearly meetings that they're not supposed to be getting along with, and somehow creating these bonds that surpass some of this other stuff. His is a message of unity and belonging, not exclusion and division. And it is a great thing to see. And it's a challenge, because that doesn't fit in some of the cultural norms, but it does fit into his understanding of who friends are and who we are to be as people who are listening to God. So I know this is an FWCC gathering, but you can meet my Kenyan friends this summer at the FUM Quaker Men USFW Joint Triennial that's happening the first week in July this next year, and it's being held in Kenya. And I hope you will strongly consider taking that opportunity. I know that the registration is going to go live here pretty soon, and your presence would be a great blessing to the Kenyans, and I know you will come away incredibly blessed yourself. It's always the case. So that's the end of my advertisement. Friends, I'm confident that as the world we know, have known, continues to morph and change, we're going to have to set aside fear and remember that we have much to offer. In the midst of our own anxiety about aging meetings and the future existence of Quakers, we know that what we have to offer is a loving God who cares about all of our neighbors, who walks beside us, who redeems us, who mourns and celebrates with us. What an important message. God has invited us to be agents of reconciliation, journeying with those who are broken and afraid. And each of us, each meeting, yearly meeting, can grow into the kind of Quaker the world most needs. And I look forward to partnering with each of you in that future. Thank you. Now this is where I think you can ask some questions. And I'm a bit nervous about this. Peggy can ask no questions. So, no, I'm kidding. She can ask all she wants. Are there any questions or thoughts? Maybe something came to your mind during this time together, my sharing, that made you think about something else, something you're thinking about. Brian.
Thanks, Sean. It's good to hear these words from you and from Dale and Tribula. I was wondering if you have observations from your time in Kenya and since about where things are in the power relationships between North and South, specifically in Friends United, with Friends in general. There's no question that the South has the numbers.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, despite the difficulties of yearly meetings, disagreeing with one another over power issues,
right.
There's a great deal of spiritual vitality.
That's right.
In a place like Kenya.
That's right.
That you have encouraged us to learn from just this afternoon. And it's not really clear to me where things are in the church more broadly, but I wonder about where are things going to go in terms of who has power and
right.
Are there ways that we North American Quakers need to share power?
So the question is how is the balance of power between Quakers in the North and versus in the South, or the global South, and not just maybe Quakers, but the church as a whole. That's a great question. I mean, as we know, the church is growing most in the global South. And it's not just in the Africa South, Southern Hemisphere, but all over the place. And that's where missionaries are going to come from to other places. And we in Europe and in North America are dwindling. And so we have an ability, because of our history, and even because of colonialism in some ways, to maintain a certain amount of power and control, often unintentionally. I think in FUM, the desire is to be that friends in places like Belize and Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, the places that FUM serves, the desire is to be recognize that we are a multicultural body all on the same level. But the reality is we're not there yet. But that's the hope. I think if you were to ask Kellum, he would definitely say that is what we desire to be. And yet much the funding and those kinds of things often come from North America, but those are for projects usually. Every meeting and every yearly meeting of those are self-sufficient. FUM doesn't do anything for yearly meetings or local meetings in those ways. We help in some of the projects, the Turkana mission, the girl child education, some of those kinds of things that we believe putting some funding towards will really help move forward the mission there. And I think that the friends in Kenya, especially, which is and in Africa, where our largest group of Quakers is, sees themselves and asks that question too. So we're having the triennial there, partially because of this reason, because we want this to be part of what we are communicating, that this is part of who we are together. But those of us sitting in the room, largely, we have not moved there completely because we haven't been raised that way. And I mean, our own understanding of who we are as Americans oftentimes gets in the way of this. And again, not intentionally, but I think we bump up against that from time to time. And we found ourselves doing that, and wanting to say, well, that's really the wrong way to do that. You ought to do it this way. And having to try to shut our mouths more often and say, and be an encouragement, because friends in Kenya and different places around the world, they know what they're doing. So I don't know, that's maybe rambling, but hopefully that's helpful. I think we're moving in a positive direction, but it's going to take a lot more work on our part. And there is work to be done in places like Africa that have also relied on a certain amount of money and funding and support to say, oh, these things, they're ours to care for. And I think people are moving that direction, but it's slow. Yeah, Peggy.
We see and hear reports of, you talk about Robert Wafula and FTC having satellite campuses like in Nairobi and so forth.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a positive thing, and is the leadership that's being nurtured moving out?
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. When Robert went there, I don't know, Sylvia, how long has it been now? 7 or 8 years now. I mean, we were talking 65 students to 80 students, somewhere like that. And last year there were 330 students, including the satellites. And the satellite lecturers are being well trained. One of the things that happened is they all now have a library and have books, and Robert did a nice job of pulling those groups together. Some of those existed as separate schools in yearly meetings, and Robert has done a nice job of pulling those all to work into one system. And I'll tell you, graduation is a hoot, because there are just people from all over the place, and that campus just gets packed out on graduation day in October. And I'm really convinced that Robert and FTC is one of the premier Quaker institutions in the world right now. Not because it is able to do things that Earlham can do, or it's very different, but the impact that is making, impact by impact, dollar for dollar, if you want to say it that way, FTC can't be beat. And they're just doing amazing work there. And I'm sure biased, but Dale would probably tell you the same thing. Yeah. Sylvia.
I had the privilege several years ago of visiting Thomas Kelly's son in New England, and he took me around to his meeting. He wanted to show me his meeting house, and on the way there I asked him to talk about his meeting, tell me what I might expect in a group of friends that he associated with. And Richard said, well, we've had our good times and our not so good times, and the not so good time we found ourselves strongly with tension, with many of us with a different truth. He said we were just struggling with each other because all of us knew a better way of doing things and pushed that on each other. And as our tension grew, our attendance diminished. And he said we became conscious, and in a spirit-led meeting, we were brought to the realization that we have to learn to look out for each other. We have to keep our voice to ourselves at times and nurture each other. And he said, since we've done that, we've become, again, a healthy, spirit-led meeting. And I thought, wow, that's profound for all of us. Thank goodness for FWCC that's trying to do that all along.
Absolutely.
Not look at the differences between us, but bringing us together to learn and appreciate and love each other, and what you just said. So what we're called to do as friends, this world needs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you summarize it all?
Yeah, sorry. I will try to. There's not a microphone, so Sylvia was just commenting about the meeting with Thomas Kelly's son 1 year not too long ago, and how he commented that their ups and downs in their meeting have related to how they treated one another and whose truth got to be the truth, and that when they finally decided that they were able to care for one another and not have to be right all the time, that's how I heard you say it, then things turned in the meeting, and it became a healthier, more whole meeting, if that is somewhat accurate. Yeah.
He said when we learn to look out after each other and care for each other.
When we learn to look out for each other and care for each other, that's when things changed. Yeah. Brad.
Hi. I got to spend time with Sean and really enjoyed getting to know you over the last week. I don't want a long answer from this. It may be more of a reflection. You may have some ideas. But it seems to me that some of the north-south questions that you're asking are also something that happens within our communities around socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity.
Yeah.
And some of the ways that we think about that, maybe we gain some insights when we go somewhere else and see it applied in a different context, and we can come back with fresh eyes. Certainly we have elements here that are different, and a different history, and a different growing up. And I wonder if you have any observations at this point, and maybe directions to point as, and I know that some people here may have ethnicity or racial identities that I can't recognize, but we're pretty pale here. And so is there something?
So the crux of the question is, not only we have differences in our hemispheres, north and south, but we may have a lot of those differences are represented in our own communities. And are we able as meetings to meet those or to address those differences? I have lots of thoughts about that. And since you didn't want a long answer, I think this is crucial. I think this is crucial, and it has to do with race, it has to do with sexual identity, it has to do with many things that we have to figure out how to be the ones that reach across. And I would say, though, that we are not always going to be the best people to do that. Sometimes we need to empower people who may look more like those friends, those folks that we're reaching, because they've got the language, the culture, and the whatever to do it. I would say that I think in many cases, Quakers are in the upper echelons economically across the board. It's really kind of an interesting thing. And this was actually true in Kenya also. Quakers tended to be more middle class in Kenya. And so I think we just have to watch ourselves and be aware of the places that we are just so blind to. Ruby Payne wrote a book, she works with schools on helping schools identify and work with people in systemic poverty. And she wrote a book called What Every Church Member Needs to Know About Poverty. And she wrote it with a pastor, and talking about just our deep unawareness in many cases of what a poverty lifestyle is like, especially one that is generational. We have had a lot of, what's the other term for poverty that's right now? Situational poverty, because of COVID and some other things. But generational poverty really is a different kind of deal. And so she wrote this really helpful book. And anyway, that's the name of it, What Every Church Member Needs to Know About Poverty. And it's worth a read. It's not a Quaker book, but it's certainly worth a read. And I think it's worth having those conversations in our meetings. Are we aware of cross-cultural groups? I mean, Carla could speak to this for us. Ask Carla these things. She's going to be able to tell you a little better than I am. But I just know that we try to be aware. We are only able to do so much in terms of our own, what I might be able to do, but it doesn't mean that I can't be aware and help empower someone else to do that well. Like Getry taking over our role, she's able to do some things in our role in Kenya that we couldn't do, simply because of language and the color of her skin and her ability to understand culture in those ways. So that's the short, not long answer. Cut us off whenever so yeah, yes, ma'am.
Trying to think how I want to put this. I'm wondering, because I get that really like was already shared, it's more of better embracing your values and living out your mission, but I was wondering if you had anything that's maybe a little more concrete that we could do to make sure that we are coming beside people and ministering with them instead of to them.
The question is, how are we ministering with people instead of doing something to people, but doing something with and for people, maybe, is...
Something more like, do you have any concrete ideas?
Any concrete ideas? Absolutely not. That's Brian. So I'll defer to Brian. Well, I think the first place to start is every meeting has to understand why they're there. Why do we exist? What in the world are we doing here? And not just because we've been here for 150 or 250 or 350 years. Why do we exist? And then take inventory of our assets. And by that I mean we have physical assets, but we have human assets. We have a location. We have particular people in our congregation or in our meeting that are skilled in something. We are put. I mean, our asset sometimes is our location within the community. We have a school right next door here. That's an asset that needs to be figured. What is it that the school needs? We are here on this corner as Plainfield meeting, and so what is it that we can do that no one else can do? I mean, it might be one of the ways to answer. I can't answer for your particular situation, but all of us have a particular situation. And then we begin to ask the people outside of our meeting. Are we interviewing people outside of the church? The people who we say, what is it that you need from a church? And I think you'll be surprised people will be willing to answer that question. No one gets asked that. What is it that a church offers? What does it offer this community? What could it offer you? And not to become a smorgasbord of these, because you're going to decide we can't do that thing. This one thing is not us. We don't have the resources, the knowledge, the whatever. But we are often focused on our scarcity, what we don't have, what we can't do. And I really think that each of our meetings has assets that we just don't even understand. And we just don't understand what are the demographics. Who lives in our community? Do we live in a community that's poor? Do we live in a biracial or multiracial community? Do we have a lot of young mothers? Do we have, begin to ask those kinds of questions. You can find a lot of that information in county, state, and city things. And then listen. I mean, one of the things I think are pretty good at is listening. What is God saying about this? And then not waiting for people to walk in our door, always, We like to hope that somebody is going to walk in our door and that's going to turn the tide. We have to be outside of our walls in order to make a difference, I think, at least initially. Relationships, friendship, anything that we can do to let people know. I know some meetings, one of our meetings in Washington does what they call laundry love. And they have a laundromat right by their meeting. So they go one night a week, and a lot of people without homes come to do their laundry. They pay for all their laundry, bring food. They don't require anything of them. But we're here because we know you're here and you need this kind of thing. I mean, that's just an example, but that's their context. So it's a good question, and it takes a lot of work, but it's really an important work, I think. One more? Okay. Oh, look at that. Well, two more. Okay, right here in front.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, that's a different question than the engaged question. We met actually as 12-year-olds at yearly meeting youth program, and knew each other until that time, that fateful 21-year-old decision that we made at 21 to get married. The fun thing about it is we'd never dated or courted. So we just decided one evening in a conversation, we should get married. And we did. And our first kiss was on the Hill of Vision in Kaimosi after we were engaged. So we like to tell young people that, no kissing till you're engaged. And they're always like, no, anyway. So that's the really short, even shorter version. And behind you, there was a question.
It's not a question. It's just a thank you for what you shared with us today. And I wrote down 3 things that are really going to stick with me.
Okay.
The 3 things you said. To be a moderate is seen as a sellout. I've never heard anybody say that before, and that is so true. And thank you for that wisdom. And then 2 advices you gave. Love outrageously and worry more about our center than our boundaries. To me, those 2 things are the hallmark of FWCC.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for everything you shared.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you.
Can you try to repeat those 3?
Oh, yes. There was some real wisdom in what she said. I would repeat that she was just commenting on some things she heard today that will stand out that stood out and will go with her. One is that this idea that to be a moderate in our country right now is to be a sellout, and that our call to love outrageously and to worry more about our center than our boundaries in our meetings and in yearly meetings and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Let's give ourselves 5 minutes to stretch, or if you need to go to the restroom, and then we'll turn it over to Robin.
Okay, well, I will watch my language.
Stretch.
It is a good idea. All right. Friends, we invite you to come back to your seats. Oh, good idea. We may have to start blinking the lights.
Come back up.
All right.
To introduce Tom.
Looks like such a fancy chair, and it has a cushion.
Yeah, but it's just for the way it hits me in my
Ooh,
back.
ouch. Yeah. Okay.
So I think, we can take as long as till like 25 after.
Okay.
Or if it's earlier than that, then I'll give Tom a few minutes to talk about Sugar Grove.
Okay. Thanks. Good afternoon. One of the joys of being together is seeing old friends and making new friends. There we go. It's okay. It is a true thing. All right. So I think most of us are back. I was going to start by telling you in January, I had the opportunity to travel to Bolivia with two friends, a member of my staff, Karen Gregorio de Calderon from Guatemala, and a member of our executive committee, Raul Perez from El Salvador yearly meeting, to visit yearly meetings in Bolivia. And this was the first opportunity for travel in the ministry in, a couple years. And it was such a gift to be present with friends in different yearly meetings and visit local churches, both in the city of La Paz and out in the countryside. And one evening, towards the end of our time, we were gathered in the basement of a friend's home with a whole group of young adult friends leaders from different yearly meetings in Bolivia, coming together across yearly meeting lines, who all live in the same city and had never met each other before. Many of them. And it's almost 1 million people. La Paz is a pretty good-sized city, so, there's some excuse. But the Quaker world is not 1 million people in Bolivia. Let's just be clear. So, to me, this was such an example of what the Friends World Committee tries to do, is to create those opportunities where friends can come together and talk about the things that matter to them, but that we do it not in just one silo, not just one yearly meeting, but that we have opportunities to meet those other friends who care about the same things we do. And we find out what we have in common and what we don't have in common. But we have to actually be in those relationships and know each other to be able to have the productive conversations that I think God is calling us to have. So my name is Robin Moore, and I serve Friends as the Executive Secretary of the Friends World Committee for Consultation Section of the Americas, which is the Association of Quaker Yearly Meetings across all the branches of Friends and around the world. But I work for the part of the Americas, which is essentially from Alaska to Bolivia. And honestly. I have been to Bolivia, but not yet to Alaska. And I'm hoping that I'm going to fix that soon. I want to thank this afternoon David Edinger for all his work in making this event possible. He serves as the regional coordinator for the Midwest region of the section of the Americas. I want to thank Norma Wallman and Luann Hagee for their help in setting up for today. I want to thank Bill Clendenning for his help in the technical support of today, and Kathy Harris for her gracious support of this event happening today. And I also want to introduce David Shiner from Illinois Yearly Meeting, who is the clerk of the section of the Americas at this time. So thank you, David, for coming all the way from Chicago, but also for clerking the section through the last 3 years. It's been almost 4 years. It's been a wild ride. I also want to do one more little thing. I was looking for Katrina McConaughey. She's coming in? Well, while she's not here, I'm going to tell you something. You might think when you get to be 50 years old that this isn't going to happen to you anymore, but I want some of you to know that Katrina McConaughey's mother is Anna Baker. And many of you have known and loved Anna as well, so just that Quaker family. There she is. Sorry. Anyway, the Quaker world is small, and the love is shared. All right. So I wanted to ask how many of you have ever been at an FWCC event before? Raise your hand. Okay. So let's start with how many of you, this is your first Friends World Committee event in person? Anyone? Some? A few? How many of you have been to one of our online-only events in the last couple of years? Excellent. How many of you have been to the Section of the Americas annual meeting? Raise your hands. And how many of you have been to a Friends World Committee World event? Also, a broad range of people. And how many of you have served on a committee for the Friends World Committee? Awesome. Some of these friends have been involved with the Friends World Committee longer than me. I've been in this position almost 12 years now, but I came to this work from Pacific Yearly Meeting. In 2007, I was invited to help lead a workshop at the annual meeting by David Mayle and Shauna Roberts from Ohio Yearly Meeting Conservative, together with Wes Daniels, who's now in North Carolina. He's the director of the Friends Center at Guilford College. And we were leading a workshop about convergent friends and what did we call it? Primitive Quakerism in a postmodern world. I can explain that later. But I had such an amazing experience at my first event of the Friends World Committee that I went home to Pacific Yearly Meeting to get myself appointed as a representative from the yearly meeting so I could come back again. And really, what was important to me was here were conversations across the branches of Friends where those conversations were supported and had been for what is now 85 years. And I hadn't really known that until I actually showed up at the event and said, oh, this is what it's about. And it changed my life. I grew up in California. I went to college in Washington, D.C. In between, I worked some time in Mexico and in New York City. But my deep roots among Friends grew in San Francisco monthly meeting in California. And in those years, about the mid-2000s, I had the opportunity, really through the mediation of the internet, to come to know other Quakers beyond my monthly and yearly meeting, including friends in Newberg, Oregon. And that opportunity to get to know evangelical friends, I wouldn't have known that I wanted to be friends with them if it hadn't been for that connection over the internet first. And then there was a year, 2007, the Friends General Conference was held in Washington State. And my husband and I decided if the FGC could come all the way to the West Coast, maybe we could get ourselves and our little kids then to that event. And then I said to Chris, and I was really afraid he was going to say, this is just way too complicated of a thing. But I want to go to Newburgh and meet these people in person. And that too was a life-changing and mind-opening experience. Both ends were new experiences for us. For those of you who may remember when I started, my kids are now adults. They are 20 and 24 years old now, and doing well. One of the first things that I did when I started in this job in 2011, like I started in June, and in July I came to Western yearly meeting sessions. And one of my observations, and I still remember this very clearly, sitting in the big meeting room down here, sort of towards the back, and somebody, during the business session, a man stood up and said something, and I knew he says that every year. And I said, oh, it's just like home. So some things we have in common across all the branches of Friends. But one of the other things that I want to say about my experience of Friends in Western Yearly Meeting and the Midwest, really, is that you do new things really well. In 1937, the first clerk, or then he was called chairman of the Friends World Committee section of the Americas, was Alvin Coates from Western Yearly Meeting. That was a new thing. And my little bit of reading about him is that he did lots of new things on behalf and in service to Midwestern Friends. In 2020, as the pandemic came over our nation and we scrambled to figure out how are we going to be friends and how can we be the Friends World Committee, we had been using Zoom for committee meetings for years before that. So we were perhaps better equipped than some groups or organizations to make this transition. But our first ever online regional gathering was the Midwest Regional Gathering. And I want to thank David Edinger for being willing to say, we could do this. And we did. And some of you were part of that conversation a couple of years ago. This is, in fact, our first post-COVID in-person regional gathering. And when I say post, I don't mean that the pandemic is over, because I don't believe that it is. But after its onset, this is our coming to understand how to live in the times that we are in. In many ways, the famines and the plagues of our day have made us fearful of doing new things. But this is not the first famines and plagues that our people have experienced. And it's not the first call to do new things that has come to us. I wanted to read from Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 19 may be familiar to many of you, but I wanted to start with 15. I am the Lord, your Holy One, Israel's Creator and King. I am the Lord who opened a way through the waters, making a dry path through the sea. I called forth the mighty army of Egypt with all its chariots and horses. I drew them beneath the waves, and they drowned, their lives snuffed out like a smoldering candle wick. But forget all that. It is nothing compared to what I am going to do. For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. The wild animals in the fields will thank me, the jackals and owls too, for giving them water in the desert. Yes, I will make rivers in the dry wasteland so my chosen people can be refreshed. I have made Israel for myself, and they will someday honor me before the whole world. we are not the first to face hard times, to face war and disease and economic upheaval. But God has not abandoned us, and we are still together. I realize this is the point where I was going to say that Alvin Coates did a new thing. In 2020, the Friends World Committee hosted a whole series of online gatherings. That was a new thing for us. And they were gatherings for young people, for women, for friends, largely Latin American friends, to be able to have online conversations across all of the national divisions and the enormous distances between South and Central America. We had a whole new series of online gatherings. In 2021, we had our first women's conference for women from Latin America and Africa to talk to each other. That is something we could not have imagined doing before the pandemic, when so many people in their home little meetings learned how to use Zoom. And yet that made new things possible across the branches, across oceans, for friends to be in communication and consultation with each other. The World Quaker Day, the event that Sean spoke about, if you haven't seen one of our flyers, you can pick one up in the lobby. That will be Sunday, October 2nd. That was a new thing in 2013, made up as an opportunity for friends to remember that we are part of a worldwide family of friends. In 2022, our invitation is for you to visit a new meeting on that day. And if you go to the website, worldquakerday.org, you can sign up to receive a list of online meetings that are prepared to welcome new visitors in all 4 sections of the world. But you could also go to visit a meeting that's close to you. I just was talking to a friend in Richmond a few days ago who said she and her husband are going to visit an evangelical friends meeting somewhere, I think in Western Ohio, where his family has roots. And so they've been doing some genealogical research and found this out. And so they're just going to go visit. And, just to see those folks in person. So those are both opportunities that you, if you are thinking, we want to continue to expand our horizons and to try something new, the very low risk version is to attend their meeting on Zoom when they already know visitors are coming. So, and we invite you to think about doing that. In 2023, we're going to have our next section meeting. We are going to try again to have an in-person section meeting. All friends are welcome to attend. So that's all of you, anybody else you know who you think would benefit from that opportunity to meet other kinds of Quakers in a community where everybody came knowing that was going to happen. It will not be a surprise. It's going to be near Greensboro, North Carolina, March 23rd to 26th, 2023. We also have some cute little handmade postcards in the lobby if you want to take it home and put it on your refrigerator. This year we're going to try a new thing to have a hybrid meeting. We have over the last 2 years had online only section meetings. So we've learned something about how to do that. We have 80 some years of learning how to do an in-person section meeting. But this year to figure out what combines, what can be done online, what can be done in person, and what can be done together is a new thing for the Friends World Committee. In the last couple of years, we have had some changes in our staff, and we now, again, our operations manager works out of an office at Reedwood Friends Church in Portland, Oregon. There's 3 of us in the office in Philadelphia, and our friend Karen in Guatemala. And we have been learning how to meet together more often online, to coordinate our work, and to support each other. Now, the Friends World Committee had field staff years ago, and my understanding is that really one of the few times that they saw each other in person was at the section meeting. And I think there must have been long times between opportunities to really work together. But the technology has changed since then. Human beings, not so much. But the technology has made it possible for us to be in more regular and constant communication, and to be able to share our files, to be able to share our communications much more simply from wherever we are working, in our own homes, in our offices, across the miles. So we have been working, trying these new things. Next week, I am actually going to Kenya on Friday for the meeting of the World Executive Committee of the Friends World Committee. In 2019, our last in-person meeting was in Canada, and we met at the Canadian Friends have a camp on the shores of Lake Huron. And that was a lovely place to meet, but my counterpart from the Africa section didn't get a visa to come. And that was not helpful to our ability to work and plan together. So this year, we decided the rest of us are going to Kenya. So far, I think everybody got a visa. Hooray. We are hoping in the coming year to also be able to collaborate with Friends United meeting more, to be able to collaborate and visit with all of the affiliated yearly meetings of the section of the Americas more closely. Because just like in the 30s, the Quakers who realized we needed a Friends World Committee to keep us in contact between big conferences or whatever, we're doing that because that communication had been cut off during World War I. And they were afraid of what was coming next. And they set up structures to be able to stay in communication throughout the tumult of the 30s and the 40s. So the Friends World Committee, we are still working on how do we stay in communication, and that need to be connected feels even more powerful when we've been isolated in so many ways over the last couple of years. I think that the friends here, the friends who come to Friends World Committee events, are among the Quakers most open to trying new experiments. You are a beacon in your monthly meetings and in your yearly meetings and throughout the Friends Church, to be able to think about there are different ways of doing what God is calling us to do, and we could learn from each other. So I am grateful for you coming together here, and I want to encourage you to say that as you go home, you carry some of that light with you where you are, and to know that you are not alone. Even if you are the only one who came from your monthly meeting, there are other people from your yearly meeting who also share that interest and that concern for what God is doing new in our world today. The angels always say, "Be not afraid." That's hard, and there have been lots of reasons to be afraid. But God calls us to be the Quakers the world needs. We are thinking about what is it that the world needs, and how are we helping each other to live into that calling. And when we are in our own little meeting, there's a calling for our local place, but there is also a calling for us to learn from one another and to share the good ideas that arise in Rocheville and the good ideas that arise in West Branch and the good ideas that arise in San Francisco, to be able to share with each other. And that, for me, is one of the great gifts of being involved in the Friends World Committee. Among the things out on the table, one, you'll find our annual report, which is something that will tell you more about what we've been doing over the last couple of years, or the last 1 year. You'll find this little postcard that has a link to a report on the strategic impact of the last 5 years leading up to the pandemic. And I encourage you to take one home and to look that up on your computer to read the report. many of you are familiar with this map. I saw one in the hallway here. If you want a new one, I have enough for everybody to have one to take home. But we're working on a new thing. We have this has the list of yearly meetings in the world as of 2017, and the estimates of the membership that was reported to us in 2017 of friends in each of the countries around the world. We have on our website, in the section of the Americas, a directory of all the monthly meetings in the US and Canada, and there's a map that's, you can expand or scroll in to find all the Friends meetings and Friends churches in the US and Canada on the map. But we think, I'm actually embarrassed, is the right word, that it's only the US and Canada on that map. And we have, in the last year, done a new census of monthly meetings and churches, Friends churches in the United States. And we are just completing that same data collection for Latin American meetings and churches. So it is my great hope that by March, when the section meeting happens, that we will be able to share with you the new, an interactive map of Friends throughout the Americas, and that is the first step towards having an interactive map of Quaker meetings and churches around the world. And that we will be able to build that out with all 4 sections to be able to share so that you can see where Friends are, both for you, if you're going to visit somewhere, you can find out, are there Quakers where I'm going? If we still get calls or notes from people who say, I just read about Quakers and I think I'm a Quaker. Are there any Quakers near where I live? And so many people are doing that research online. We want it to be accessible for people wherever they are, to be able to see, are there Quakers where I am? And one of our partners in developing this project is the Arch Street Meeting House, historic meeting house in Philadelphia, which is a tourist site, and I mean, it's also a place where Quakers meet, but it is a tourist site and a museum about Quakerism in the city of Philadelphia. And they have people who walk in their doors from all over the world and who ask, oh, this is interesting. Are there Quakers where I'm from? And they want to be able to see, in Japan, are there Quakers where I'm from? The answer is yes. Anyway, so we hope that that is a project that we're working on that we will be building out over the coming year. And I invite you to check back. It will be it's the first in a series of new projects that we'll be working on over the next 5 years, I think. I made myself a note here. I want, with your permission, to take a picture of you from here. Because one of the things I think is so valuable of getting to stand up here is to see you all there, and you don't get to see that. So if that's all right, I'm going to take a picture. If you don't want to be in the picture, tell me now. You can leave your mask on or off. It is 2022. There will be people with masks and people without masks. It's just part of the life. There we go. Oh, you moved over. Good. We need to move. Thank you. So now I'm open to answering questions that you may have. Yes?
In the development of World Quaker Day, was the thought given that the fact that it falls on World Communion Day?
It does. The question was, did we know that it is World Communion Day? And the answer is yes. And the idea that Quakers could live into that and be part of the World Communion was part of the inspiration of choosing this particular date. David.
Did you want to say anything about Learn Worlds, or that's
Oh, yes. So Learn Worlds is a software, but in the last couple of years, we launched a new online orientation program for Friends, for new representatives to the Friends World Committee. We also made it accessible to everyone who attended the online section meetings, to be sort of an introduction to what is the Friends World Committee and what does it do and how does it work and what do you mean there's other kinds of friends. And that is accessible online so that people could watch the video and do the little exercise from their own home on their own time, that it would help to be part of the orientation of new people who, if we weren't sure how, we knew this was a need before there was a pandemic. So we were beginning to build that starting in 2018 or 19, but it actually launched in January of 2021. And the software the platform that it's living on is called learnworlds.com, which just facilitates that sort of online courses and online community communication. So if you are interested in connecting to that, we can help you to set up if you'd like to read that or to be able to share it with another friend. We can offer that. Yes?
Robin, where I first became acquainted with you was you mentioned working with the movement Convergent Friends, and I wonder if you could say a bit about where you see that having gone in the 14 or more years intervening, and how you see yourself relative to that these days.
Yes. So her question was about that we first met when I was talking more about Convergent Friends, and where is that conversation now? So that word was that idea of being convergent friends was friends coming together across the branches of friends, blown in the same direction by the Holy Spirit, to find out that there are friends we have more in common with each other, those of us who are interested in what does it mean to be authentically Quaker in the world that we live in. We can have more in common with each other than perhaps with the extremes of our own yearly meetings, that we found a conversation that was enriching, and it didn't matter so much what yearly meeting you came from. You might be coming from starting in a different place, but we were actually coming together and not. So I'm not a mathematician, but my understanding is that convergent lines never actually cross. They never actually touch. They just get closer and closer together. So that to me was part of like not melding everything into like one mush, but having that opportunity to come to know one another. So the conversation has moved on in some ways. One is I got this job with the Friends World Committee, and I would have been in no way prepared or qualified for this job without those conversations that I was having before this began. And it was originally a shorthand for the sort of long strings of adjectives that people were using to describe themselves. So progressive, evangelical, Christian, Quaker, blah, 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 or the unprogrammed, conservative, but in the Quaker sense, such and such Christian Quaker. Like, it was a sort of unwieldy strings of adjectives. And I was like, literally looking for something to be shorthand for what I saw. These are really all the same thing, but slightly different ways of putting it. So I think some of those friendships continue. Some of that, I discovered that the Friends World Committee had been having that conversation for 85 years now. I've also learned that we weren't the first ones to use that term. Like, there were folks in the 60s talking about convergent friends. But I had never heard that until Wes Daniels was doing more research about that and actually found references to that among Everett Cattell and folks with the what did they call those conferences? The Faith and Life conferences in the 1970s. I don't know, did any of you go to those? I did not. But anyway, there were people who were interested in those conversations for decades, and every generation has to discover it for themselves anew. So I think there are more opportunities for friends to be sharing across branches. Recently, a story I heard was a friend, J.P. Lund from Wilmington Yearly Meeting, an Ohio Valley Yearly Meeting, had been to the World Conference of Friends in Kenya that the Friends World Committee organized. And while he was there, he heard an evangelical friend led a whole workshop about human sexuality that he thought was really helpful in helping people to have conversations about that in a healthy and constructive way. And so back at in Wilmington Yearly Meeting, he suggested that they invite that friend from Rocky Mountain Yearly Meeting to come and lead a workshop like that in Wilmington Yearly Meeting. And he was recently telling me that he would never have known who she was or how to invite her to come to their place without that experience of a cross-branch conversation. And that the folks in Wilmington wouldn't have been open to having this conversation if it hadn't been someone who came with those evangelical Quaker credentials, and that it was healthy and productive for their yearly meeting to at least be able to have a conversation. So I think those things continue to happen. So some of the people who are most involved in those online Convergent Friends conversations have gone on to positions in other Quaker organizations. Martin Kelly is the editor of Friends Journal. Wes Daniels is the director of the Friends Center at Guilford College. And there are other people who are just doing their work, continuing to do their work in their local meeting, and they're not doing it on an international stage, but they're still holding that space for flexibility and convergence where they are. That's what I'd say. Yes, Susan Lee.
You mentioned traveling amongst Bolivian friends. Were there particular themes, concerns, work that is arising amongst Bolivian friends that connects them with each other?
Yes. So one of the other things out on the table is a longer story about our travel to Bolivia, if you want to read that. One of the things that was a really interesting conversation in Nela, Bolivia, was one of the larger yearly meetings in Bolivia. What the theme of their yearly meeting in January, their sessions, was about missions and about becoming a sending yearly meeting. And they had invited former missionaries from Northwest Yearly Meeting to come and talk to them about that. And the folks from Northwest had agreed to come, but they were uncomfortable being like the experts on missions per se. I mean, they are, and yet they are also. So they had invited a young couple from Bolivia who are doing missionary work within Bolivia, but not with the Quakers, to come and be part of a panel that was going to talk about that work, and a young couple from Mexico. Actually, they're from Mexico and Guatemala, but they had been doing missionary work in Mexico to come and speak. And we all ended up staying in the same house of Timoteo and Elizabeth Choque. So at breakfast one morning, we were having a little conversation about this panel that the friend was organizing. And Raul Perez from El Salvador Yearly Meeting had a chance to tell them about the work that El Salvador Yearly Meeting is doing, sending missionaries both to Nicaragua and to Cambodia. Not with, not with North American money, or not with, they were sending their own missionaries to do this work. And the friends in Bolivia and the friends in Northwest had no idea. So it was literally a breakfast conversation, which is one of the joys of traveling in the ministry, as many of you know, led to the Raul being invited to be on the panel so that friends in this larger audience could hear more about what they're already doing and how they are overcoming the hurdles and building up their own people to do this work. But we said, we should hold a larger conversation for friends to be able to have this conversation, not just here in person in Bolivia. So actually last month, on August 20th, the Friends World Committee section of the Americas hosted an online consultation about missions, all in Spanish, where we had speakers from the Salvadoran woman in Cambodia, a young woman from Bolivia who is she's like a public school teacher traveling into rural and the indigenous communities within Bolivia, she's an itinerant school teacher. But part of her calling to do that and to accept that work was also a calling to be, for the love of God, to be doing that work and to be sharing that as she travels. The young Salvadoran couple who are in Nicaragua talking about their experience. And so we hosted this for Central American friends and South American friends to be able to talk to each other about this issue that concerns them. And that was what they wanted to be talking about. How do we help each other? And so we had, probably an hour of presentations, and then a little over half an hour for small groups with people from, Central and different yearly meetings in Central and South America to talk to each other about what mission has God called you to, and that you don't have to go to Cambodia for God to have a mission for your life. What are you doing in your home, in your community, or maybe if God has called you to bring God's word to people in other countries, how do you go about doing that? And to be able to see themselves as the people who could be carrying that. And one of the last things I'll say is that the experience of being a Latin American friend, being a missionary in Cambodia, is received very differently than North American friends or going to do the same work. And they have found that opening was deeper and wider, both because of Latin American friends' willingness to live more close to the people, but also just to be, it doesn't carry the same inequality that we were talking about earlier about the international weight of the history of United States in other countries. So anyway, it was fascinating. And my job was just to be the tech host. So it was really Karen Gregorio who organized all the speakers and getting it together. And then a whole series of Latin American friends who were the small group facilitators. It was a joy to be in service to that. Yes?
Does Friends World Committee concern itself with being a forum for sharing, for example, strategies to combat poverty with kinds of ways of doing justice, or is it more about the faith and who we are and what we believe?
So her question is the Friends World Committee a forum for sharing strategies for combating poverty or other justice issues, or is it more about the faith? And what I would say is that we are a channel for friends to talk to each other about the things that matter to them. Our job is not to run programs of social justice, anti-poverty work. Our job is to help the Quakers who are doing that work know the other Quakers who are doing that work, and to be building up the Quakers that the world needs, who will be doing all kinds of work in the world. So when I was new in this job, we were preparing for this world conference in Kenya in 2012. And one of the stories I used to say was one of the opportunities at this conference will be for friends who are doing prison ministries in different parts of the world to meet each other and to be able to talk about what motivates them and their strategies. And it's not because the Friends World Committee knows better strategies, but we believe that when they come to talk to each other, they will share that encouragement and both for people who are already doing the work and people who are like, I feel this nudge that I ought to be doing something, but I don't know where to start. And then be able to meet somebody who is already doing that work. That is our job, is to hold that container. And actually, that sort of interest group happened in my dorm in Kenya by coincidence. I was not part of it, but I saw every day those folks talking to each other from Kenya, from the United States, from other parts of the world. And it was an important opportunity for them. I want to tell one more story about that. Many of you are familiar with the Alternatives to Violence program. And there have been friends from the United States talking to people in Latin America about this Alternatives to Violence program for a long time. And, sometimes it seemed interesting and sometimes not so much. But the experience of Latin American friends hearing from Kenyan friends about what the Alternatives to Violence program meant to them changed that conversation enormously. And the growth of AVP in Central and South America over the last 10 years was directly related to conversations that those folks had to be able to share that it's not just something that the Anglo people think would be good for us, but it's what the Kenyan people said, this was good for us, and here's why and how. And I think that changed the tenor of the conversation and has made a difference to real people's lives. We didn't plan that, right? But it happened. Yes?
I don't think either you or Sean maybe mentioned the word colonialism, but so much of what you're both talking about is how to move beyond the colonialist environment that was present and added to, perpetrated by many Westerners in missions and other cross-cultural connections, and how to be faithfully present now in a way that is not bound by that, and to recognize some of the places we Westerners have limits because of that.
Yes. I want to write down the 3 things that I want to say about that. I've already forgotten one. Anyway, so yes, her question was about, we haven't really talked about colonialism. You haven't used that word, but clearly that's a theme that we've been talking about. That was the other one. So I have a couple thoughts. One is that in the Friends World Committee, we've been talking about that for 40 years, about how to be less, and I don't think we've used the word colonialist 40 years ago, but to be more inclusive of Latin American friends, to have more interpretation, to have people be present and engaged in the discussions that we're having. We have been working on that for 40 years, not always successfully, but trying and getting better. And that today, one of the things I think we've accomplished in the last 10 years is to have Latin American friends on all the committees of this section of the Americas. And it's not just a North American organization with a Latin American program over here, but on the executive committee and the finance committee and the nominating committee, to have those friends represented and to be part of it. And it's an enormous amount of work. The amount of interpretation and translation and misunderstandings and support that it takes is totally worth it, but not to be underestimated. Secondly, is that I wanted to say that in 2024, we are preparing for a world plenary meeting in South Africa that will be a hybrid event. There will be a few people who will travel on behalf of all the yearly meetings in the world to go to South Africa, and other friends who will be able to participate online or in regional gatherings closer to home as part of that same conference. And one of the things that we know needs to be part of that preparation is explicit conversations about racism and anti-colonial, post-colonial ways of being together across the world among friends. And that isn't just going to be the work of like 200 people for 10 days in South Africa in 2024. That is like, how do we prepare to have that conversation for the next 2 years getting there and for the 20 years afterwards? We are raising money, just so you know, for both the travel fund and the technology access fund for that World Plenary meeting, and for what the World Office is currently calling a Peace and Justice Secretary, but we will do some work at supporting the Quaker United Nations office, but also to support friends having that conversation across the vast distances and the different places and countries that we come from and the languages that we speak, to be able to have productive conversations about how to be friends in the 21st century. And the last thing is to think about how what we have been doing, sometimes we find new words for and new ways to understand things we were already doing. And so I haven't talked to Kelly Killam about this, so I don't know how this is going to go over. But I'm going to say it anyway, that one way of looking at the funds that friends have been sending from the United States to Africa for these projects over the last 100 years is reparations. Have you been familiar with that topic, that word about how to make amends for the harm that was done in African countries and to African descendants people in the United States? And my meeting in Philadelphia is all about talking about the harm done to descendants of enslaved people in the United States. But I think there is also harm that has been done over hundreds of years in Latin America and in Africa, and some of those funds going back begin to repay some of that debt. And I don't know how that's going to go over with friends who are actually doing that work, but it occurred to me this week to wonder about it. So we're thinking new things, and I'm sharing them with you. If that's not appropriate, please tell me afterwards. Jim.
If you look at a wide sweep of our history, the Society of Friends, the last 150 years, we've gone from being a largely English-speaking community in English-speaking parts of the world to a global society. But if we look, since we're in the Midwestern section here, we look in North America over the next 50, 75, 100 years, one thing we're seeing is a transformation of North American Quakerism through the growth of diaspora communities of Quakers so we have Congolese friends worshiping in Louisville and in Buffalo. We have Latin American friends in dozens of cities. We have two Friends churches in Indianapolis and Chicago that were once Anglo Friends churches that are now Latino Friends churches. And those are just a few of the numerous examples. Can you talk, I mean, it's your position to see that transformation better than anyone else here, perhaps. Can you talk a little bit more about that with that vision of, past our own lifetimes, where North American Quakerism will be and what it will be like with the greater number of languages and peoples and ethnicities than we have now?
I will say that you're right, that there is that growing number of Quaker congregations in the United States who are already, who have many immigrants who have come, who are Quakers at home, who have found each other the way immigrants always do, to find other folks from home to be together with. And they are forming their own churches. And that has been going on for, 30 years, longer than that, I'm not sure. And so that has been growing. And the places where those friends are finding ways to interact with the other Quaker congregations where they find themselves. Sometimes that's been rich and rewarding, and sometimes it's been hard and conflict and painful. But it's going to be more and more. And I think we can learn from how we try to interact with friends from other yearly meetings. Some of those same muscles are necessary for interacting with friends from other cultural backgrounds. And I think it can be the beginning of thinking differently about what a Quaker meeting could look like, or how it could worship together, or what service they can provide to the community. And I think Friends United meeting has done some work in trying to support those new congregations among African immigrants to the United States, to be able to find each other across and to be able to support one another in being faithful where they are. I think more evangelical friends have done a better job of reaching out to Hispanic friends or Latin friends in the United States to help them to connect with one another and to be supported in the network of Latin American or Spanish-speaking Quaker pastors in the United States. It's been a ongoing community for, a couple decades. But the overlap is complicated, and the intersection is often complicated, and the Anglo-Quakers' assumption that how we do it is how really it's Quaker, and what these other folks are doing is not, gets in the way. But I think we are all seeing that we are going to be called to do things in new ways, and that finding ways to be in relationship, healthy and supportive relationships and respectful relationships with the immigrant communities where we are is part of grounding to be in communication with other people of other ethnic or economic backgrounds where we are who may not be immigrants. The Friends World Committee, or the section of the Americas a couple of years ago was looking at the possibility of starting a new program. And we are, I wasn't going to do the whole fundraising pitch while I was here, but now you're going to get to hear all the good stories. This program that we're now calling it Quaker Connect, an opportunity to be able to help the friends who are on fire in your local meeting to be able to bring productive experimentation to your local meeting, but also to be connected to the other people who want to do those experiments in their meetings, because you need support to be able to keep going when that happens in your local meeting. But as we were developing, looking at what is it that Friends meetings need today in the United States, we began by asking also friends from an African congregation and Hispanic congregations and Anglo congregations in the United States, so that that was built into the preparation from the beginning. And I think that is also key to what comes next. Has to be good, has to work for all of us, because we need each other, or we are not actually going to make it to the next decade or the next century if we don't begin to work together. We are too small a denomination not to work together. Sean said something about, other denominations are also experiencing a decline. I read somewhere that there was a year that the Presbyterian Church in 1 year lost more members than there are Quakers in the United States. And you know what? They didn't go out of business in that year. So we cannot afford that. We actually have to be willing to talk to each other if we're going to be the Quakers that the world needs. It needs us to begin by being open to those other kinds of friends. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but there we are. So I think that I have overpassed the time that we were planning, and some of us are really looking forward to go to see the Sugar Grove Friends meeting or the Friends Church. So David is going to tell us more about that.
Well, before Robin leaves, I'm sure most folks have already made a contribution towards this event, and I'm going to ask Robin if people still want to make a contribution to support the expenses. How would they do that, today or later?
Oh, I would be happy to answer that question. If you would like to make a contribution today, you can hand me cash or checks. I can put it in an envelope if you'd like to have a little more security about that. We have these cute little envelopes out on the front table that you're welcome to put cash or checks in and mail them back. Or you can go to our website at www.fwccamericas.org and make a donation with your credit card.
I think she said that before at places. Very, very minor. Do you want these back if people don't want them as souvenirs?
Yes. You may have noticed some of them were used before. You can take out the card and recycle that, but I'll take the
just put it on the table
thing and leave it on
out
the
in the
table
lobby.
out here.
Right. Yes, now we're going to turn our attention to Sugar Grove, and Tom Ham has agreed to give us a little context, and as he's coming up, I just say my personal interest is about 7 generations ago in my mother's family history. A Quaker widow from Ohio who ended up with, her husband died and like lots of small children decided to move to this area, and she landed at Sugar Grove and was here for the rest of her life, and she and a couple of her children are there in the graveyard. But Tom's going to give us a little background, and then Tom Roberts is going to greet us down there and be our host and talk about what's going on today among friends. And after the meeting, there'll be several of us who are willing to drive. We'll be out in the lobby or just out there to carpool down there. Sean, did we ever get directions, or anything printed? Or?
No, but if you want to GPS it, you can it'll show up at Sugar Grove Cemetery.
Yeah, it shows, if you GPS, it shows Sugar Grove Cemetery. So, Tom Ham. And
it's about 2 turns.
Yeah. Most of you know Tom, but if he'd like to give his vita the...
I'm Tom Ham. I teach history at Earlham, and I do Quaker stuff generally, which is my assignment for this afternoon to tell you a little bit about how the Sugar Grove Meeting House came to be, and perhaps more importantly, how it came to be what it is today, which is perhaps the least changed Friends Meeting House in the state of Indiana, since it was built in 1870, I think, or thereabouts, the building itself. The roots of Sugar Grove go back over 200 years to when, in 1818, under the Treaty of St. Mary's, the Delaware and Miami and Shawnee peoples ceded ownership of most of what is now central Indiana. So friends with North Carolina roots, some coming directly up from North Carolina, some carrying in Ohio or eastern or southern Indiana, began moving into the White Lick country. And by 1823, there was a White Lick monthly meeting of friends, centered mostly a little to the south of us around what's now today Mooresville. By that time, however, some friends had moved farther north on White Lick into the newly created Hendricks County. They were Newlands and Hunts and Blairs and Carters and Hawketts and Mendenhalls and Baleses. And so, as near as we can tell, by 1823, they were holding meetings for worship near this site. And in 1826, Sugar Grove was officially established as a preparative meeting or congregation under the care of White Lick Monthly Meeting. Originally, as you would expect, there was a log meeting house. Later, it was replaced with a frame meeting house. And finally, about 1870, the current brick meeting house was built. Interestingly enough, Sugar Grove has never been its own monthly meeting. When it was established, it was part of White Lick Monthly Meeting. Then, when the town of Plainfield was founded, Friends here built a meeting house, and in 1857, Friends in Plainfield and at Sugar Grove were set off as their own monthly meeting, but it was named Plainfield instead of Sugar Grove. Even when Sugar Grove Friends were an independent congregation, they continued the use of the name Plainfield. Well, by the 1850s, Sugar Grove had become an important meeting. We don't know exactly how many members were there because Friends weren't collecting those sorts of statistics at the time. But we know two very well-known ministers among Friends, recorded ministers. Eleazar Bales and Eli Newton were members at Sugar Grove, as was, after 1860, Robert W. Hodson, a very prominent elder who often traveled in the ministry with Eleazar or Eli. And Eleazar Bales, who was my wife's great-great-granduncle about 5 generations back, was especially well known. He was once part of a delegation sent by Friends to the White House to meet with Abraham Lincoln about exempting Friends from the draft during the Civil War. Sugar Grove's move away from the larger body of Indiana Friends began in the 1860s. During and after the Civil War, there was a reform movement that was very much centered among Orthodox Friends in Indiana. If you want the long detailed story of this, I wrote a book about it that I'm happy to recommend. But suffice it to say that by the mid-1860s, there were a number of Indiana Friends and Orthodox Friends across the country who were advocating reform or renewal among Friends. They wanted to relax some of the harsher features of the discipline, like disowning people for marrying non-friends or not having a wide enough hat brim. They wanted to improve the quality of ministry generally, and they had become open to higher education. Eleazar Bales had actually been in line to become the first superintendent or head of Friends Boarding School, which later became Earlham College, but he fell ill and wasn't able to take it on. So by the late 1860s, there's a real interest in reform here, and all indications are that Friends like Eli Newland or Eleazar Bales or Robert W. Hodson were sympathetic or at least accepting of it. By the early 1870s, however, that reform movement had been pushed aside by another movement, became known as the Revival. Here is where you see most American Friends moving dramatically closer to the evangelical Protestant culture that dominated American Protestantism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Revival methods like altar calls and mourners' benches were introduced into Friends meetings. The plain life and Quaker distinctiveness generally were condemned because they set Friends apart from other evangelical Christians. They were seen as salvation through works rather than salvation through faith. And this was a movement that most Orthodox, certainly most Gurneyite Friends in the United States, were accepting by the mid-1870s. Friends at Sugar Grove, however, saw this as simply being too dramatic a break with Quakerism as they understood it. So when a traveling Quaker evangelist named Amos Kenworthy came through and tried to hold a revival meeting at Sugar Grove, they shut it down very quickly. They then tried to bring Western Yearly Meeting around to their point of view, arguing that things had simply gotten out of hand, that they had gone too far. But in that, they failed. The last pleas by Hodson and Bales at Western Yearly Meeting sessions in 1877 were met largely with hostility. And so the two friends who were by then in their 80s slowly felt that they had no choice but to leave. And so slowly in the midst of one of the business sessions in the old yearly meeting house there. They made their way down the aisle, out of the meeting house, followed by a small number of like-minded friends. And it tells you how nasty some revival friends could be, that a visiting minister from Eastern Ohio, David B. Updegraff, felt led by the Spirit to strike up a hymn. The hymn was, "See the mighty host advancing, Satan leading on," as the conservative friends left the meeting house. Another one of them, Albert Maxwell, said that as far as he knew, it was the only time that friends had ever been sung out of meeting. They might have been read out, but this was sung out. So the friends who left organized Western Yearly Meeting of Conservative Friends. They found sympathizers in several other monthly meetings in West Union, at Beech Grove near Indianapolis, at Westfield, a few in what's now Indiana and Wilmington yearly meetings. The Sugar Grove Friends held the sessions of Western Yearly Meeting of Conservative Friends at Sugar Grove beginning in 1877 and continuing every year until the yearly meeting was laid down in 1962. Gradually, they gave up a lot of the sterner marks of plainness, but they continued to worship in the old ways, right down to the time that the yearly meeting was laid down. And for many friends, that made Sugar Grove a special place, a place where older ways were honored, where from the Quaker past was being preserved. And for a long time, Sugar Grove Friends were even so conservative that they resisted things like electricity. Although I think there's electricity now, isn't there, Tom? All right. So that is the Quaker world into which you will be entering when we visit Sugar Grove.
Thank you, Tom. I think we can give folks a few minutes to use the restroom, but people who are willing and interested to drive down and carpool will meet out in the lobby. Julie, you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to mention to you to really use the restroom here because there's no running water at Sugar Grove.
Okay.
There is an outhouse.
Yeah, use the restroom here. So
Oh, there's not an outhouse.
yeah. Yeah, if you want the real frontier experience, but that's another. But give a few minutes to people to use the restroom and so forth, and we'll meet out in the lobby and see who's willing to carpool and share rides. Yes, Sean.
And when you pull in there, you can park in the grass. There's no.
Yeah, when you make the turn at the traffic circle, you'll see the graveyard and the meeting house, and just on the other side of the meeting house, there's some gravel but grass you can park on. Thank you, friends. Okay, Sugar Grove, Indiana.